Ein Gimel Amud Aleph. Shachto shelo la'ochla. If a person shechted for people who are not allowed to eat it, let's say, or who cannot eat it. There's a kanim, there are arelim, or let's say they don't have the ability to eat. So we say if you do that on Shabbos, you're chayav v'chatas, because if you have no potential eaters, the Pesach is possible. So you did a malacha which didn't lead to a kosher korban, so you're chayav v'chatas. That's what the Mishnah said. Pshita, says the Gemara, kiven dehasam pasul hachachayiv. I mean, we understand if the korban's going to be pasul, then avada you're going to be chayav v'chatas. It's a davar pashut. More answers b'shum the Tana Sefer patur, because in the Sefer we talked about a case where it technically was not pasul, so therefore you're patur from achatas, Tana reisha chayiv. So basically, to be sort of stylistically symmetrical, it's not to teach me a chiddush. It's not a chiddush, but we see many times where the Tana will structure a Mishnah sort of in a symmetrical fashion. Freit Gemara, v'hanami psheta. Well, even the second part of the second part, where where there it's not a psul, and so therefore we say you're not chayiv. So there's also davar pashut. Mishum dehasam kosher hachal patur. If over there it's kosher, then it's going to be a patur from achatas, because you accomplished something when you shechted the korban. Ella, rather, the Gemara then changes and says, I did the Tani shachto shelo lishmo b'Shabbos. Since the Tana mentioned shechting a korban pesach shelo lishmo, which makes it possible, Hananami shelo la'achla. So it was complete and mentioned shechting the korban pesach also for people who can't eat. So in Achalami, it was a chiddush. It wasn't a chiddush, but it was sort of, again, done stylistically to include sort of all the various parameters. V'higu falamali. Why was it so important for the Tana to tell me shachlu shelo la'achla? Mishum de kaboila iflili Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua. He wanted to highlight that machlokes between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, which we saw regarding whether it's roy or not roy, where Rabbi Yeshua seemed to suggest that if you were toya b'dvar mitzvah, you would be potter from achatas. Rabbi Eliezer did not have that shita. Arvele Rav Huna bar China livrei. Rav Huna said the following to his son: Ki azus l'kamed Rav Zrika. When you find yourself in front of Rav Zrika, boy mine, ask him the following question. By the way, gentlemen, another gadol passed away, Rabbi, I don't know if you remember Rav Avidan. Rav Avidan was Yaakov's Rosh Hashiva in Shalavim. And we hosted it here in Los Angeles a number of times. He gave drashas in Young Israel. You may have a very distinguished Talmid Chacham. He wrote Moed V'Tzahal, Moed V'Shabbat B'Tzahal. It was the major halachic compendium that soldiers would use when they were out in the field in the Israeli army, and he also passed away just in the last couple of days. So many great rabbanim are passing away. It's just really, really something. Anyways, so he said when you go to Rav Zrika, ask the following question: L'divrei ha'omer mekalkel b'chabura potter. So if you make a wound on Shabbos, chabura, so you're chayav v'chatas. But it's only if a chabura is a functional thing. So when we learn Masechta Shabbos, for example, you have an abscess, and you open up the abscess in a way to maintain its opening. So that is a chabura that's not lekalkil, and therefore you'd be chayiv. Or you open up somebody's blood vessel to drain it because they used to phlebotomize for medicinal purposes. However, let's say you make a chabura, but it's not for a positive, it's not for a takana, it's for a kilkul. It's not a metake, it doesn't correct anything. You're not chayiv for Shabbos. So then why do we say if you shech the korban pesach for people who can't eat it, we say you're chayiv achatas? Why should you be chayiv achatas? What did your act of shechita be? How is it effective? Why is that not an example of a chabura lekalkel? It should be potter. So the Gemara answers, yeah, there's a tikkun that im alu lo yardu. The din is, if a korban is not pasul begufo, for example, if it's tamei, if it had a balmum, tamei is a different story because there's a tzitz. But for example, let's say it should never been magish in the first place because of balmum. It's missing a leg, so it's a psul beguf. Such a korban, even if you put it up incorrectly, you put it on the mizbech, you got to take it down. But there are some psulim, for example, if it has to do with the bailin, like here, there's nothing wrong with the korban itself. It's just you didn't have eaters for the korban. The din there is that if you're not supposed to put it up on the mizbech, the chelav. But if you put the chelav on the mizbeach, you don't take it down. So the Gemara answers, at least the shechita accomplished that im alu lo yord. However, freit the Gemara shachtu v'nimsa balmum chayiv. One of the other examples that the Mishnah said, if you shechted it, the korban pesach, and you found that it was a balmum, you did it on Shabbos, you're chayiv achatas. The Gemara says, why? Matike, I understand. What did you accomplish by shechting this korban? Nobody could eat it. And for the Gemara, tikein bedukin sheba'ayin alibid Rabbi Kiva. The Omer imalu lo yardu, that even though all other mumim, enachanami, if you put them up on the mizbeach, you'd have to take it down. In the case of a mum, dukin sheba'ayin, most meforshim understand like a cataract in the animal's eye. So there's a machlokes, as Rabbi Kiva holds, that with such a mum, if you put it up on the mizbech, you wouldn't have to take it down. So this is an example of shechting, and you found it to be a balmum, that you'd be chayav achatas, because at least you accomplished that im alu lo yordu. Freit the Gemara, one of the other examples, it said shachtu v'nimsa treifa b'seiser. You shechted the korban, and then you did a post-mortem examination of the lungs. You didn't know before you shechted it was a treifa, but you shechted it and you evaluated the lungs. You found a hole in the lung, so it's a treifa. The Mishnah said you're potter because there was no view of knowing. Ha-begoloi chayiv. But let's say it was a certain treifa where it was externally noted that it was a treifa, and you shechted it. So mati came. A treifa has a psul and a goof that im alu yardu. Even if you put it on his back, you have to take it down. Nobody can eat it. So what did you accomplish by its shechita? It should be a chavala. It should be a chavala mekalkel b'chabura. It should be potter, not chayiv.
What happens if why did when the king sent that, the Goyish king sent the animal with the Baduka Shebayim, why did they not accept it? Why?
Not the king. That's the Gemara in Gittin, right? That we study on Tisha B'Av, the Kamso Bar Kamsa Gemara there.
Right.
That the Gemara says because of the nuso of one of the Tanoim, because one of the Jews gave the Romans an idea to tell the Caesar, you know what? send a korban to the Beis HaMikdash, because you're allowed to accept korbanos from non-Jews. And he told them, we're going to make a mum in this Bedukin Shaba'ayim. So the Romans did not consider that a mum. They would offer it. But you can see, based on this machlokas between Rabbi Akiva and the Chachamim would not offer a korban of Bedukin Shaba'ayim. Now, if the Roman Caesar sent an animal, Bedukin Shaba'ayim, they should have offered it as a sakon nefashos, pikuach nefesh, in a sense. But one of the Tanaim said, no, don't do it. So the Gemara makes a comment, because of his tzidkis, led to the Churban Bayesheni, because it led to the fact that Vespasian was sent with his armies to lay siege around Yerushalayim because they didn't offer that korban. That's the story that you're remembering about Beduk and Shabbayim. Elazar? Elazar? Are you there?
Yeah, but because he muted me. But according to Rabbi Akiva, though, he would have accepted it.
Yeah, but Rabbi Akiva lived 100 years later.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Not 100 years later. Rabbi Akiva was 135. This is 70, but he lived a long life. So, but Rabbi Akiva, remember, only became a Talmid Chacham when he was 40.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So,
okay.
It was 80 years. Yeah, but by the way, the Chachamim argued with Rabbi Akiva.
No.
Okay, back to our Gemara. So the Gemara asks about a treifa, ma tikein. Tikein lahotzi midei nevela. You know what? The shechita of that korban, at least doesn't have tumas nevela. Because when you shoot an animal with a bow and arrow or with a gun and it dies, so it's a nevela. You didn't shecht it, so it has tumas nevela. But if you shecht an animal and you find it a treifa, fine, you're not allowed to eat it, but it's not tomei. It does not have a din of nevela. So the Gemara says, at least with the shechita of that korban, you accomplish. It's not mekalkel bechabura. It's not a kilkul. It's not a complete kilkul, because at least you prevented the animal from having tumas nevela. Maski Ravina. So Ravina asked the kasha. Had Tanya, the fact that it says in the Brayso, Shoichet Chatis B'Shabbos B'Chutz L'Avodah Zorah Chai B'Aleh Shalosh Chatis. So you're not allowed to offer korban chatas on Shabbos. That's number one. So you therefore, when you made the incision, you made a chavola, and therefore you chayav a chatas. Now, you shechted it outside of the Azor. If you do shchutei chutz, you're chayav a chatas. And then you had in mind that the shechita should be l'avodah zorah. It's another chatas. So you bring 3 chatases. The question is, why should you be chayav any chatases? Mati came. Because you just taught me tonight, mekalkel v'chabura potter, if you make a chabura, but it doesn't accomplish anything, you're not going to be chayav anything. Why should you be? What was it misakim? Amar v'avira shemoitzumi de ever menachai. You know what? At least a non-Jew, a ben Noach, who is mitzuva, not to eat ever menachai, by shechting this animal, it's now dead, and therefore they can eat it. They don't have to necessarily eat shchita, but it accomplished that it wasn't ever menachai. Okay, very interesting Gemara. Then the Mishnah said, Shachto v'noida. After they shechted it, he found out that all the owners of this Korban Pesach had died. So there, well, you're an oinus. You're not a shogeg. You thought everybody was alive. You shechted it. That's not considered a shogeg. That's considered your oinus. Amar v'namarav Osham shenitik l're'iyah. So you have a Korban Osham whose owners died, or the owners found another animal and was miskaper with the other animal. Now they have this animal. The din is You have to send it out to the field to graze until it gets a mum. Then you can sell it. With the money, you can buy another korban oil. That's what the halach is. So you have an osham shenitik l'riyah. Now, before it gets a mum, you went ahead and shechted it. But you didn't say why you're shechting it. You shechted it stam. The din is kosher la'oila. You can bring it as an oila. Al maksover lo boy akira. Obviously, he didn't formally say, "Oh, I don't want this to be an osham. I want it to be an oila." You don't have to do it to be oiker the korban from its name. And because we say that even if you shechted it without saying anything, it was kosher la'oila. So the Gemara asks the Achi Kilo Nitik Nami. So let's say even before it was sent out to graze, and it was a korban osham whose bailim already had kapor with another animal. So perhaps then as well, if I shechted it stam, it could go for an ola. Gemara says no, because gzeir lacha kapora to lifnei kapora. Because then you might do it even before you had kapor with another animal. So we make it gzeir lacha kapor because of lifnei kapor. Uminot temra. Where do we see this? Did not. Osham shemei subalov. You have a korban osham, the owner died. Oh, shenis kapubal. Let's say they lost the original osham. He found another animal. He brought a korban osham. Then they found the original animal. The din is yira ad she'istoi. So you take that osham, you send it out to graze until it gets a mum. And what do you do with it? Once it gets a mum, you mocher, you can sell it and use the money, and the money you would buy for a korban nedava like an ola. Rabbi Yezer Omer Yomus. Rabbi Yezer says you put it in a dome like an igloo and you don't feed it and it dies by itself. Because he holds it's like a chatis shemesu baleh, which also is lemisa. Rabbi Yezer holds an osham is the same. Rabbi Shua Omer Yimocher that you have to sell it biyavi b'dam of oila, and with the money you buy an oila. B'dam of a gufa low, but the animal itself can't be offered. For example, you shechted stam, like we said, without an akira. Why? Because the gozer lacha kapara, to take kapara, they made this gzera. Shmami, no, it's a good right. Eisver Chizur Ravuna. Shachto, the Mishnah said, a case where they shechted the korban pesach, the noida shemoshchu balam es yodam, that the owners had withdrawn their subscription from that korban pesach. Tani Allah, and we learned on that case, bachol, let's say it wasn't Shabbos. Because on Shabbos we said you'd be potter. So, but bachol, if it's Tuesday, ki hai gabna yisarf biyad, you have to burn it right away. You don't have to wait until Lina the next morning, Rashi says. Even though a Pesach can be offered as a shlamim, so if this animal whose bailim had died had been shechted l'shem shlamim would be kosher. Now that he didn't formally oiker the name of the Pesach from this korban, you have to burn it. Because it's a Pesach that was nishchat without anybody. So the Gemara has a problem, because if you require a formal change of name, so Hai Pesachu, it's a korban Pesach, and Kivin de Leslie Biden has no owners. Havale psula begufo. It's a psula in the goof of the korban. Am telachi yisarf miyad. So that's why I understand why you have to burn it right away. Even though stam azoi, if you shechted it without saying anything, it would be like a shlamim, but you need akira. And if you didn't do the akira, it's the same pesach on it. That's why it's completely possible. You have to burn it right away. But if you're saying, like we said tonight, that if you take an ashram and you just shecht it without being oikered, and it works, so therefore a moister pesach can be a shlamim. Psula mishum ma'id, and why is it possible? It's mishum dover acher. It's a side reason. For example, the koshochet le'achar tamid shel ben arbayim. Right? Normally, the afternoon tamid has to be the last korban. You shechted this after the ben arbayim. That's why it's bad. So ibert surah boy. Yet that korban would require lina. Not, you can't be sarif miyad. You have to wait until the next morning, and then like all noiser, it's burned. The Tanya Zeaklau, kol shepsula begufo. If it's a psul in the goof of the animal, like it's got a mum or something, you sarf miyad. But if the problem is bedam of a bailim, let's say the dam became tomei, the dam was taken out, or the bailim have, like Rashi said, the blood got spilled, or the bailim died, or became tomei, the din is to uber tsuraso. You don't burn it right away. You wait until it's possible belina. The yetzel beisa sreifa. So from this Gemara, it seems that you need to do an akira. So don't say that if a person shechted it without uprooting the original korban name, it's kosher l'shemola. Ela shachto l'shem ola kosher. You can't shecht it stam. If you shecht it for an ola, then it's kosher. Alma boy akira. In fact, therefore, you require an akira's shame. You can't just shecht it stam. You have to say this is not going to be for a pesach, it's going to be for noiva. Now, that a vort was thrown out among the chevra, that the Amri Kigon Shayu Bailim Tmei Mason. This was a case where the Bailim, not that they died, but they became Tomei. Vinitchil Pesach Sheni, they were pushed to Pesach Sheni. Haigu the boy Akira. It's only that's why it requires a special Akira, because they intended that this animal should remain a Pesach. They wanted to use this same animal as the Pesach Sheni a month from now. That's why it needs Akira. But in a regular case, not if they were Tavei Mason, but if, for example, if they died, would not require an Akira. Shechting it stam would work as well. Michael Amemar, what would you say to that? In fact, that's a good kasha. The animal was designated as a korban prior to Chatzois Yud Daled Nisan. Umeisu Bailim Achar Chatzois. And the owners died after Chatzois. Because prior to Chatzois, this animal after Pesach technically could be offered as a shlamim, because a moiser Pesach at least is good for a shlam. However, once the bailim died, it cannot be used as a shlam. So it's an example of nira v'nitcha. Initially it was roy for it, but now it was pushed away. V'chola nira v'nitcha shuv enechoyz v'nira. Miruhu taima el Rav, because isn't it like the svar of Rav that ha'amar Rav bale chayim ein nitchim? Only geshechted meat, pieces of meat could be nitcha. This svara is not said by live animals, like what you're trying to say. That hoil v'nitcha nitcha. Ella says Rav Papa Hamani Rabbi Eliezer. That this is the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer. The Amr. V'chein ha'shoichet acherim l'shem Pesach. If I have other korbanos, a shlamim, a meiser, a bechor, I shecht it, thinking as a Pesach, so possible. The havalei psula begufo. It's a psul in the goof of the korban, and it needs to be burnt right away. Rabbi Eliezer, he chatas nami mechayim. If it did it on Shabbos, you'd be chayim chatas. The halesle Rabbi Eliezer toy bidvar mitzvah potter. Rabbi Eliezer is the one who argued with Rabbi Yoshua that says even though you're occupying yourself in doing a mitzvah is a korban Pesach, since you end up shechting a korban that's possible, you're gonna have to be chayav chatas. So it can't be Rabbi Eliezer. El Tirgum Rav Yosef, Rav Salah Chasidik, Rav Papa, Hamani Yosef ben Chunoy. You know what? It's Yosef ben Chunoy. It's not Yosef ben Chunoy Omer. Hanishchatim l'shem Pesach l'shem Chatas. All other korbanos, if you shech them l'shem Pesach l'shem Chatas psul, and therefore alma psul begufohi. So all korbanos that are shechted with that improper machshava have the psul guf. Mishum hachi tzarf miyad. That's why they have to be burned right away. Uvivturei sover like Rabbi Yoshua. Regarding the various korbanos that are potter, he also like Rabbi Yeshua regarding if you're toy b'dvar mitzvah, you're potter. Rav Ashi Amar Rav, Rabbi Shmuel b'nosh Rav Yechim Lebroika. That Rav is really holding like Rabbi Shmuel. The Tanya, Shmuel b'nosh Rav Yechim Lebroika Omer, Im yeshos bayom leida, im mashku b'alam isidei, im oshem eso shenitmu. If there was enough time on Shabbos to find out when he shechted this Korban Pesach, that the Bailam had withdrew their subscription or they had all died or became Tomei, then you'd be Chayav Achatas. But otherwise, you would not be Chayav. However, you don't have to burn it right away. To Ubert Surasu, you let it have Lina overnight, the Yotzil Beis HaSreif, and then burn it. Now, why? My time. Lavishim the Loboy Akira is because he didn't require a formal Akira, and now we have proof to that. Mar says, Mimai, there's no proof. Maybe Dilma Mishum the server look at the Tana Be Ravavu. The Omar Afilu Pigul Nani boy Ibertsura. There was a Tana that said that there's no greater Psula Guf than Pigul. But even so, he requires every korban that's got a Psula Guf. You don't burn it right away. You let it be Nifsal Belina and then burn it then. Why? The Yolif oven minoiser. You learn a hekesh oven from noiser, just like noiser. You burn it after the morning, the same thing by pickle. You wouldn't, if you don't learn like that, nitmu bailim Michael Memar, that if the bailim became tamei, what are you going to say? Avali by Akira. There for certain you need to change the name of the korban. The Amr Chia Bargam the Nizruka Bichabura, Gon Shayu Bailim Tamei Meis, V'Nichlu Pesach Sheni, like we said, because there, by not doing Oiker, everyone knows you want it to be a Pesach because you need it for Pesach Sheni. So it's like we said before that our Shita is like Yosef ben Chanoi, who held that anytime you shech l'shem Pesach, l'shem Chatas, it's possible, and that's why you have to burn it right away. Yosef ben Chanoi, Adon lachelu dvarim, Adon lachelu dvarim, Adon lachelu dvarim.
So let me ask you, if a Korban Pesach, he designates a behemoth for a Korban Pesach, and everybody dies before he shechs it, so that same behemoth could be used for a Korban Pesach a month later for a Shivkos Pesach Sheni? Or does he have to?
That heter is only when the Bailim became Tomei.
I understand. So let's say they became Tomei.
Because there's a method for somebody who's Tomei to resurrect himself by Pesach Sheni. If somebody dies, it doesn't help him Pesach Sheni.
Okay, so let's say he becomes Tomei, and the same korban that